Hey everyone, this is Brown at IF Brown, and today we're going to be talking about a movie called Radioactive Dreams from 1985. So, in case you're wondering why I do not have a physical copy of the movie on hand, it's because that stateside, the only way it seems to be legitimately available is by way of VHS, which last I checked was a little hard to come by. But you can watch it online. And in my case, I watched it on YouTube, and I'd seen the movie before, like a long time ago, but I wasn't really in, I guess you could say, the mindset to appreciate it at the time. So I got to rewatch the movie recently on YouTube, online, and it's actually better than I thought it would be. I will say, though, that I was disappointed in the fact that the only way one's able to watch it is in the way of, say, grainy VHS format. And I was able to better understand some of the stuff that was going on, but because of how grainy it was at times, and it wasn't really clear in quality, it was difficult to, hear everything that was being said, as well as, be able to distinguish certain characters and certain scenes in terms of the extras. I mean, nothing wrong with the stars or anything like that, but so it was still a bit of a chore in terms of the actual viewing experience, but being able to better understand what was going on, I think I enjoyed the movie a lot more than I did my first time watching it. So Radioactive Dreams was the second movie to be directed by a guy named Albert Pyun, who is probably one of the biggest names in the B-movie genre in terms of directing B-movies, because he has over 50 movies to his credit. That being said, only a few of them are what you would call decent to arguably good. And it seems like at the start of his career, he had a handful of movies that were solid, but as his career went on, his movies tended to get worse. And usually it seems to be the other way around with a lot of directors. Like, they'll start off sort of ho-hum, but they'll get better over time. But here it was kind of the opposite. The first movie he directed was called The Sword and the Sorcerer, which is one of the movies I reviewed kind of recently. And that was actually a fun movie if you can see it on, say, Blu-ray or something like that. Don't go for the DVD, don't go for VHS, go for Blu-ray. It's much more clean and pristine, and you'll be able to enjoy it that much more. But it's not what I'd call a straight-up good movie, but it was an all-around decent movie that was legitimately fun, and it seemed to be a good starting point for a director as well, and in the sense that he made a mark for himself as far as starting off in the sword and sorcery genre. And so going on to Radioactive Dreams was something totally different, and I actually appreciated that about this particular film, because Albert Pyun could have gone with, say, another movie that was in the fantasy genre. And arguably, Radioactive Dreams is in the fantasy genre, but it's more sci-fi, low-level fantasy, I guess you could say. But anyway, it was the fact that it was totally different from Sword and the Sorcerer showed that Albert Pyun, at one point in time, did have a lot of originality to him when it came to, say, crafting stories. Because Sword and the Sorcerer was more I guess you could say, of a group effort in terms of, the people who, wrote the screenplay, produced it, and Albert Pyun directed it. But here, Radioactive Dreams, Albert Pyun actually wrote the screenplay and directed the movie. So, you definitely see more what he's capable of in terms of, like, his artistic vision, as opposed to, say, Sword and the Sorcerer, because, both are fun movies, but you could definitely tell that Sword and the Sorcerer had more of a, how should I put this? There were a lot more hands in the pot, so to speak, whereas with Radioactive Dreams, you could definitely see that it was more of a, one person running the show, if that makes sense. But anyway, the story of Radioactive Dreams, it starts off around World War III, and basically, all the nuclear bombs have, in the world have gone off. So Earth has become a radioactive wasteland. But our two heroes are Phillip, Chandler, yes, named after a fictional, private detective, played by John Stockwell, and Marlowe Hammer, also named after a fictional private detective, played by Michael Dudikoff, who both of these characters as children were shuffled off into a mountainside bomb shelter by these two bank robbers who initially they were going to stash their ill-gotten gains into this fallout shelter, or this bomb shelter, with news of the impending nuclear war being on the radio. And these two kids happen to be playing nearby, and so sure enough, a bomb goes off nearby, and they grab the kids and bring them into the shelter, and they keep them, and they stay there for a number of years. And you get the idea that these two kids, they were basically brought up on a lot of 1940s culture and memorabilia. Like they were basically raised by the two bank robbers on detective novels from a long time ago, and they also kind of were raised on old school music from the 1940s and what have you. And so these kids had a very unique upbringing, being raised by bank robbers, steeped in 1940s memorabilia and nostalgia. But one day, the two bank robbers go ahead and leave the shelter, and they promise that they'll be back for the kids. But they say, "Hey, keep an eye on things and wait until we get back." But they never come back. So the two kids, they grow up to become teenagers, and they've been keeping the shelter up and running all these years. But when they get to where they're like 18 or 19, they decide, okay, our parents, may or may not be coming back, so we can't spend the rest of our lives in this shelter. And so they actually tunnel out, and they find a way out of the shelter, to where they're able to get to a car that the bank robbers had stashed there initially back in the day. And so the two teenagers, Phillip and Marlowe, they deck themselves out after getting themselves a haircut. They deck themselves out in their best 1940s detective gear and set out into the world to hopefully find their fathers, but also just to experience the world for the first time, because they don't know what to expect. All they know is that there was a bunch of fire and destruction, and they don't know what's going on out there. So the two of them, they get out of the shelter in this old school automobile that has a trailer hitched to it, and soon enough they find themselves in a rather bizarre situation, in the sense that they pick up a hitchhiker named Miles, played by Lisa Blount, who initially tries to seduce them and then steal their stuff from them, but it sort of backfires, and she actually ends up leaving something with them, namely these two keys, which are to the world's very last nuclear missile. And so initially they don't know the significance of this, and it's not until they meet a woman named Rusty, played by Michele, who she also has her own agenda as well, in the sense that she runs with a gang of cannibals, but she actually takes a liking to Phillip, and basically helps them escape from the cannibals. And so they have a sort of they have a strained relationship with her, because they don't know if they can trust her, even though she rescued them. But that was mainly because she was sweet on Phillip. And so the three of them, they basically formed this sort of makeshift group in this very strange world, because you've got marauding biker gangs, you have cannibals, you have mutants, mutants. And eventually they realize that the keys that they have, that they got off of Miles, are literally the keys to the world's last nuclear missile. And considering all the other missiles in the world had gone off years ago in World War III, whoever holds the keys to the last nuclear missile holds a lot of power. And so soon enough, Miles takes it upon herself to go after Phillip and Marlowe, as well as Rusty, with one of her own gangs, to get the keys back, because she eventually realizes that, hey, I left it with these two morons. And so in the meantime, Phillip and Marlowe, while they're trying to get acclimated to this insane world around them, their only moral guiding point is the stuff that they learned from their disappeared dads, the bank robbers, and everything they learned about life they learned from detective novels. And so they're going in with the mindset as we're private eyes, trying to solve the world's craziest case in a world gone to hell, so, or something along those lines. And so I mean, they're aware that it's like, I mean, there's reality and then there's fiction, but the thing is, they've been steeped in fiction for so long that they're looking at it from the perspectives of private eyes. And so with that perspective in mind, you see, their idealism and their cynicism sort of, clashing, because Phillip is definitely more cynical and Marlowe is more idealistic. Marlowe's thinking that, hey, our pops had a good reason to leave us, and they'll probably be back, and we'll find them. And Phillip is basically saying, no, they got tired of us, they left us, and we're never going to find them again. And so, along with trying to keep a hold of the keys to the world's last nuclear missile and survive in this crazy world around them, they're also trying to see if they can find their fathers, whether they're alive or dead. So anyway, it's just it's a really odd movie, but in a strange way, I mean, it's very enjoyable. I'm not gonna say it's quite good. I'm gonna say that it is entertaining, though. I mean, it's decent to borderline good. I mean, depending on your tastes. Like, I think in this case, it definitely helps if you like movies that were made in the 80s, because there's a certain aesthetic that's on hand with movies that were made in that decade, and that carries over here too. Basically, you had movies that were set in apocalyptic wastelands or after World War III, where you had all these fantastical elements like mutants and monsters and things like that, or that people would basically form their own empires from the ruins and all that. Never mind the fact that nuclear war would basically devastate everyone on multiple sides, and there wouldn't be much of humanity left to rule, and it wouldn't be a happy wonderland like the movie portrays things to be. So I mean, it's definitely one of those movies that you have to check your brain at the door for sure when it comes to, say, I guess you could say, the science of nuclear war. I mean, I'm not a scientist or anything like that, but I do know that if World War III happened, the result would definitely not be, something like this movie. I mean, as fun as this movie was, I mean, it'd basically be game over. So if you can check your brain at the door in that regard, you'll probably have a good time. But also, you could definitely tell the movie's made in the 80s because of, the fashion and the soundtrack. A lot of the characters in the movie, I mean, they sort of look like new wave rock bands when they're supposed to be punk gangs. And sometimes, I mean, the look works, and other times it's like, yeah, you don't look intimidating at all. But it's sort of mix and match, because, I mean, they were obviously operating on something of a reduced budget. But, I mean, at the same time, there's enough effort put into some of the, scenery and visuals to where, the gangs, even if they do look like a new wave band at times, they do have a certain style to them that makes them stand out from one another, if that makes sense. And also, there are a couple of legit monsters that you see in the movie, like, some sort of, radiation scarred, lizard men that pop up here and there, or these mutated dogs that pop up through the sewers, and basically it's like their heads are large enough to where they're able to devour like two people at once and things like that. So I mean, that was pretty cool. And also there are apparently there are gangs of dwarven kids called disco mutants. I mean, they're little kids in disco outfits, but that curse like sailors. And so I mean, you have all these really bizarre denizens in this world. And of course, I mean, the sort of creepy part is the gang of cannibals that they run across, because I mean, yeah, they sort of look like drugged out hippies, but at the same time, their physical mannerisms, and the way they handle their victims, like the way they touch them and stuff like that, that was pretty creepy. But anyway, though, so it's definitely a unique movie, just in terms of like you got a unique setup, that could arguably have only been done in the 80s, but also you have several unique, I guess you could say, groups of characters, in the sense that you have all these gangs, but you also have some unique characters in the form of the protagonists, because Phillip, as played by John Stockwell, and Marlowe, as played by Michael Dudikoff, are two very unique characters, because, as I mentioned before, I mean, they're going throughout life, once they've exited from the bomb shelter, with the mindsets of everything they learned from reading about fictional private eyes, to the point where they've taken on the identities of these fictional private eyes, and basically they're having to adapt to the world around them. But ironically, you kind of get the idea that it's this, in order to survive in this insane post-nuclear world that they find themselves in, with all this chaos around them, the fact that they're latching on to these fictional identities of private detectives, that tends to sort of give them an edge in terms of being able to maintain some level of, I guess you could say, commitment and survival, and being able to make it in the world. Because if they'd gone from the shelter without having anything to latch on to, in terms of if they'd just been booted out into the world as little kids, they would have been eaten alive. But because they're going by what they've learned from detective novels and stuff, I mean, it, in a very strange way, gives them a bit of a shot at making it in the world. And plus, the two of them, they have their own set of unique skills, which gives them a chance, whenever they're up against, the bad guys. But I liked how you had like two different personalities. I mean, Phillip, as I said, is definitely the more cynical of the two, but he's very calm and cool, and in a dangerous situation. And Marlowe is definitely more optimistic, and he's more like the goofy kid brother. But at the same time, he's the kind of guy who he tends to get in trouble more often than not, and more often than Phillip does. But at the same time, though, he's endearing enough to where you're like, you want him to see him land on his feet, so to speak. Or, it's funny how sometimes if he's in a jam, he gets out, through sheer luck, things like that. But I thought it was interesting, the actors they had portraying the guys, because you had John Stockwell as Phillip. Most people remember him as the friendly jock from the horror movie Christine, about the Plymouth Fury with a mind of its own, as well as his bit part in the movie Top Gun. He plays the pilot that Tom Cruise has to rescue at the beginning. The guy, he has like some kind of panic attack. So seeing him here, playing this, almost delusional type of straight man in a lead role here was rather interesting, because I mean, like I said, he's latching on to this persona of a private eye, and plus he has his own cynicism, with his perspective on his parents leaving him and things like that. And so I thought it was very fascinating seeing John Stockwell, or I should say an actor like John Stockwell, playing this part. And I wish he'd gotten to play more parts like this. And he was also in another Albert Pyun movie that it came out I think it was like a year after Radioactive Dreams. It was called Dangerously Close, and it was Pyun's third movie. And he was actually pretty good in that too. And he also had a very different type of performance in the sense that he was, a villain, and he was pretty good at it too. So if you get a chance, check out Dangerously Close. That was actually a pretty cool movie for the time. But anyway, but the main surprise, though, was Michael Dudikoff, because most people who know the name know Michael Dudikoff as the guy who was in the American Ninja movies, and he tends to be like, very serious, very much of a B action movie type of guy. But he actually, I think, got his start in comedy in some ways. He was in, I never saw the movie Bachelor Party with Tom Hanks, but I know he was in that. But yeah, seeing him here though, knowing the fact that he was predominantly an action star, after a certain point, you see him in Radioactive Dreams, and it's almost a revelation, and the fact that he had so much comedic talent within him that you didn't expect to see in this kind of movie. And Michael Dudikoff actually did a really good job in the part as a sort of someone that you describe as a hapless younger brother who constantly finds himself in over his head, but is nonetheless someone who's got your back in a pinch, and through luck more often than not is able to get you and himself out of a jam. And so I thought it was funny him playing this kind of role, and he actually did a really good job in it. And one of the funnier parts is, there are times where he sort of screams like a girl at times, like, well, he'll be trying to be a tough guy, but then something will come at him and he'll be like, ah, that kind of thing. But no, he was actually pretty good in this. And I definitely wish that he had done more work like this, because I've only seen bits and pieces of some of his action movies, but at the same time, you watch him in those, and you watch him in Radioactive Dreams, and it's like night and day. It's like, he really stands out as far as something like his work in this movie versus, say, the work in his action movies. And so it's too bad that he didn't, as far as I know, he didn't really do comedy as much as he easily could have here. But yeah, so I also liked the actresses of Michele Little and Lisa Blount in their roles. Michele Little plays Rusty, and she was the one who was initially running with the Cannibals, and she basically lured Phillip and Marlowe into their trap, but she basically switches sides. But I kind of liked her character. The only complaint I could think of is that she looked a little too new wavy, I guess. Don't get me wrong, I like 80s aesthetics and stuff like that. But you look at the gang members of the Cannibal gang, and then you look at her, and it's like they actually look like something that you'd see in a post-apocalyptic, gang, I guess. Whereas she looked like, I guess you could say the front woman of a new wave 80s band. And so, that's the only, downside to her character, but that's more appearances than anything. But I kind of liked her character because, you saw that there was a bit of a conflicted personality there, in the sense that, on one hand, she was, loyal to the gang that, she was running with. But at the same time, though, she genuinely felt guilty about, bringing innocent people to be fed on. And so it's not until, she, met Phillip and Marlowe that she really, I guess you could say, got up the nerve to end up switching sides and what have you. And there's actually a really nice scene that her and John Stockwell share, in that basically she's kind of playing the honey trap, but the way she plays it, though, it's very calming, very soothing, to where like she lures Phillip away, and to basically seduce him. And it's like, that feeling you get when one had, like, you watch a movie and you see someone have sex and it's supposed to be like something for the first time, and you really get that feeling, for the character of Phillip, because I mean he's been in a bomb shelter for most of his life, and he's never been with a beautiful woman before, and he has no idea what to do. And so it was really interesting, the way she played the seductress. And I mean, even though you could kind of predict that there's something's off, she still does a good job with, you get the idea that she kind of realizes that this is literally his first time with a woman, and how gentle she's being. And so I mean, it was a kind of a disappointment in the sense that it turned out, yes, it was a trap, the whole time, but then at the same time though, you kind of see that she's able to pick up on certain things. And also John Stockwell did a really good job in the part, because it was interesting seeing him go from the sort of calm and collected tough guy, private eye, to the teenager he really was, who had never been with a girl before. And I thought that was a really nice moment on John Stockwell's part. So yeah, I really liked Rusty's character, and so I guess she definitely added an interesting dynamic to the two protagonists. And also Lisa Blount as Miles. I liked her character too, and I definitely think that it was interesting having her be a villain, because I mean she initially has a similar thing going to Rusty, in the sense that there's a bit of a Honeytrap vibe, but at the same time Lisa Blount did a decent job with the whole being a witch in sheep's clothing, a witch with a bee in sheep's clothing. And it turns out that basically she's got her own agenda with her own gang, to get a hold of the keys to the world's last nuclear missile. And you see how cutthroat and cold and calculating she is about the whole thing once she drops the honeypot persona, or I should say the honey trap persona. Sorry about that. And I kind of wish that we'd gotten to see more of her character, because depending on how you look at things, each of the gangs, you get the idea that they have their own stories and their own motivations, and there's enough effort being put in to make the gangs look unique to one another, and in her case, when you get to her and her gang, I mean, you kind of wanted to, or at least in my case, I did want to see, more of her side of things, as far as, was she always, this cutthroat and cold about things, or, is it something that she was just kind of, she eventually just became, and so there was just enough of nuance to her character to where, I mean, yes, it's a cheesy, post-apocalyptic movie from the 80s, but at the same time, the way she plays it, I thought I wanted to see, where more of where she came from, but instead she, she was just, a witch with a bee who, was very cutthroat. So I wish I could have seen more of her character, but, and so you also have, the actors, George Kennedy and Dan Murray, playing the two bank robbers who are surrogate father figures for Phillip and Marlowe. And I mean, on one hand, I thought it was cool seeing the two guys, especially George Kennedy. I mean, I loved him in Thunderbolt and Lightfoot and Cool Hand Luke, but unfortunately, they only show up at the beginning in the flashback, or whenever Phillip and Marlowe are having memories from when they were kids, like the bank robbers are reading to them from their books, or when they leave the shelter, and there's a sort of a random twist at the end, like two of the gang members actually turn out to be those guys. And so I'm not going to say which gang members they are, but so I mean, it was kind of a surprise in that regard, but at the same time, you look at it, and the twist, to me at least, it didn't make a whole lot of sense. I think it would have been better if, like, say for instance, we gotten to see maybe some lengthy flashbacks with the two with George Kennedy and Dan Murray basically raising the two kids and then leaving the shelter, and then you never see them again. You know, it's basically you don't know what happened to them. I think that probably would have been a better way to end it, or at least as far as, you know, it would have been a better way to leave, you know, their fates. You know, it's like undecided. Like, were they, you know, did they really just leave the kids, or, you know, did they get killed? But the fact that you find out that, you know, they've been running around outside this wasteland the whole time. I mean, you don't really know why they never bothered to go back to the shelter to get the, you know, to rescue their, you know, surrogate sons, you know, and it just, you know, you just see them pop up at the end. And granted, you know, a very cool, you know, shootout follows. That part was cool, but it's just, you know, when you see these two guys, you know, you show up, you know, after, you know, being absent from most of the movie, you know, it's kind of like another reviewer, I remember, pointed out that, you know, it's kind of like, you know, Albert Pyun suddenly remembered that, oh yeah, I have these two guys I can use in the movie. I may as well, you know, throw them in at the last second. And that's kind of what it feels like with them. I mean, so yeah, I mean, it was cool seeing these guys, like I said, especially George Kennedy, but at the same time, it was a disappointment in the sense that they weren't used in such a way where, at least in my opinion, that would have been better for the sake of the movie. You know, the other thing is, the soundtrack, I'm kind of 50-50 on the soundtrack, because, I mean, on one hand, I do tend to like stuff from the 80s, or that style of music, when it, like, say, comes to, you know, synthwave and things like that. And some of the music here is good. Like, some of the songs are good. Like, I mean, you have, you know, Sue Sad, some of her music's pretty good, Jill Jacks, and there were some others. Like, there was a whole bunch of people that, like, basically I wasn't familiar with the names, but I mean, there are some good songs on there, on the movie's soundtrack, and sometimes, you know, the songs are used in very appropriate ways, like Sue Sad's song, Guilty Pleasures. There's this, you know, really cool scene that her song is used in. She has a couple of songs in the movie, but that song, Guilty Pleasures, it basically encapsulates, I mean, you know, the whole, you know, theme of, you know, chaos in this, you know, post-nuclear wasteland, and you basically see, you know, all the factions milling about and what have you, and you see it all from Phillip and Marlowe's perspective. They're sort of looking around all dumbfounded and everything, and it was really cool the way they used the song. So you had moments like that, but other times, though, there'd be songs that, you know, they'd already played once, but then you hear them play again, and you're kind of like, okay, I mean, I know this is supposed to be dramatic, but now it's just kind of getting annoying. Like, whenever, you know, Phillip and Marlowe basically went on a couple of times, whenever they reconnect with, you know, say a character like Rusty or something like that, this, you know, song called Turn Away, I think it was called, starts playing. And I mean, you hear it the first time, I mean, it's a decent song, but every time, you know, the two of them reconnect, it's kind of like, or sorry, let me phrase that every time, you know, the group of them, you know, reconnect with one another and that song keeps playing, it's kind of like, it really does sort of, I guess, detract from, you know, what was, I guess, supposed to be a dramatic moment, and it just gets annoying. And yeah, I just, I think, yeah, so, I mean, that's part of the problem, I guess, is the fact that, I mean, on the plus side, you know, you could tell this movie's made in the 80s. On the downside, you could also tell this movie's made in the 80s. And I just think that I kind of wish that they'd been able to, you know, expand more on, say, the lore and backstories on some of the characters, because, I mean, they introduced like a whole bunch of factions within this wasteland, and also, you know, Phillip and Marlowe, I mean, they're good as far as protagonists go, and, you know, you spend enough time with them, you know, they're not the problem or anything like that, but, you know, when you get glimpses of backstories of some of the other characters, you just kind of want to see more of, you know, how they came to be, and things like that. And I think that, like, the action, they actually did a pretty good job with the action scenes, because like when it comes to, say, the duo being chased by a gang of bikers, I mean, you could definitely tell that they were borrowing from, like, say, the Mad Max movies, and it's sort of like a pastiche of that in some ways. But and also, you've got, the shootout at the end, which is actually a really cool shootout. But the only problem with the shootout at the end was that there are times where, with the lighting, it's very difficult to tell who's getting shot and who's firing. And that could be from my perspective, that could probably be because of the quality of the video I was watching it on. So hopefully, if someone decides to put this out on Blu-ray or something like that, I mean, hopefully they'll clear it up. I mean, the people who put Sword and the Sorcerer on Blu-ray were able to clear that movie up. And so, there's definitely a fan base for Albert Pyun films. And so hopefully, someone's, either watching this, or there's enough of a fan base for Radioactive Dreams to where they say, hey, let's spruce this baby up. And so where people can actually tell what's going on as well as actually enjoy the movie. And so, so yeah, I mean, that was another thing is, I mean, mainly because I guess it was the quality of the movie I was watching, or the video I was watching. There were times where it was difficult to tell. I mean, I could see that there was an action scene going on, but I couldn't tell who was doing what at times, or there were moments where characters were talking, but their voices would be muffled. And so, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and give Radioactive Dreams 3 out of 5 stars. I mean, it was a decent, entertaining movie. I mean, I actually had fun with it, and being able to watch it online, of course, hey, watch it for free. But yeah, I just I do wish that someone actually would put this out on Blu-ray, because I mean, it's original enough to where, I mean, it stands out from a bunch of post-apocalyptic movies that came out at the time. And it's fun enough to where, I mean, you can, sit back and, just enjoy it, turn your brain off, that kind of thing. And there's some genuine wit and imagination that went into it, you could tell. It's just because it's hard to tell what's going on at times, and there's not enough development given to certain characters that are introduced in the movie. You do find yourself wishing that maybe there'd been like I don't know, more footage that was put in to where you understood better what was going on with different factions. Like, why does each faction want to get a hold of the keys to the world's last nuclear missile and what have you? Because it's like, you can tell that, they have their own goals and agendas and all that, but you just don't know what they are. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I definitely see where, it might have been influential on some level when it came to, say, how, stories and games and the, post-apocalyptic future might have been depicted. I'm not going to say, I'm not going to lay all the groundwork, or give all the credit to Radioactive Dreams, but, you watch this movie and then you play certain video games or you read certain, books, and you see certain things and you see the movie and you're kind of like, someone had to have watched this movie at some point. And also, like I said, I enjoyed seeing John Stockwell and Michael Dudikoff in roles that were kind of atypical for the type of performances that they would usually do. And I wish that both actors had gotten more roles like they had in this movie. But as far as I know, the only legitimate DVD that's available for this movie was a German edition, I think, or it was German made, and it was region 2, I think. But as far as stateside goes, I mean, as far as like, say, legit DVD releases, nada. So so if you're able to get a hold of it though, like whether it be VHS or watching it online, I mean, it's worth a look. And you watch this movie as well as, say, like The Sword and the Sorcerer or Dangerously Close, and you could definitely tell that Albert Pyun had, a distinct, creative vision, with him. And it really seemed like, after having, seen a movie like this, as well as The Sword and the Sorcerer and Dangerously Close, it really seemed like, he would go on to bigger and better things. I mean, he went on to other things, but it was mostly kind of a downward trajectory, in my opinion. I mean, he had a few other, decent movies afterwards, but I mean, in terms of, the, energy and originality that, were on hand here in a movie like Radioactive Dreams, a lot of the other movies he did kind of, paled in comparison. So, as I said, Radioactive Dreams, 3 out of 5 stars. Not a good movie, but it was still a fun movie. It was entertaining. And, yeah, just kind of shut your brain off and enjoy the show. But thank you very much for taking the time to check out my review. You got any questions, comments, please drop a line and let me know. And y'all have a good day. Bye.